Okay, welcome everybody. It's March 1st, 2002, and today we're holding a virtual meeting of the Shellfish Advisory Panel. This is the second meeting of this reconstituted panel. The first was back in November, and I hope that all the participants have had a chance to see the past documents on the website, including the summary of the meeting, which we will be approving today. My name is Dan McKiernan. I'm the director at the Division Marine Fisheries, and I want to thank all of you for participating today. Because this is a virtual meeting, and the first virtual meeting of this group, I thought it would be helpful for staff to, who are going to be sort of controlling the meeting for us, to go through some of the rules of the road, not just for the group who are the panelists, but also for members of the public who are listening in. So I'm going to ask Jared Silva to go over how he's going to manage this meeting for us using the technology. Jared and his assistant Julia do this routinely for our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission business meetings and public hearings, and by all accounts, they do a great job. So Jared, why don't you speak briefly on how we're managing the meeting today?
Thank you, Dan. Good morning to the folks on the panel and the members of the public. As Dan said, I'm just going to go through a short list of the so-called virtual rules of engagement. We met in person the last time, but over the course of the past 2 years, we've held several of our other public body meetings in this virtual format, and these virtual rules of engagement are consistent with how we've managed those meetings. So this is a public body meeting of the Shellfish Advisory Panel. All meeting materials are available on the Shellfish Advisory Panel website for those who have not obtained them yet. This meeting, as I said, it's being held virtually. It is being recorded and it will be published to DMF's YouTube channel. The link for DMF's YouTube channel is here. The chair, which is Director McKenna, he'll proceed through the agenda. All panel members are participants in this virtual webinar, and they'll be able to mute and unmute themselves. We ask you that if you're going to be participating in a discussion, to please use the raise hand feature. This will create a queue, and the meeting moderator, which will be either Julia or I, will acknowledge you. When you're acknowledged, you can unmute yourself and provide your comment, and we'll proceed through the discussion of the agenda items that way. We have 2 voting items today. That's the approval of the agenda and the approval of the minutes from the November meeting. The votes to approve those will be taken by roll call. Julia will administer that roll call. Please vote yay or nay when your name is called. Lastly, to the members of the public, as this is a public business meeting, you'll be muted throughout the meeting. At the end of the meeting, the agenda provides an opportunity for you to provide public comment. If you wish to speak, you'll be acknowledged at that time. To be acknowledged, use the raise hand function, and the meeting moderator will acknowledge you. You'll be provided approximately 3 minutes to provide public comment. So I'm going to turn this back over to Director McKiernan to proceed through the.
Jared, I do have one question. There are some members who are not panelists, but are attendees. And do we want them to fill out their name fully if they would like to speak on the record? Like, I think someone might have come in with just a phone number. Would we prefer that they
if they're just a phone number, they're likely a dial in, and that's not an option.
All right, well, thanks for that. All right, so actually, Jared, I'm thinking that if when it comes to approve the minutes and the agenda, I could ask for any objections, and then if none, I could take it by consent. But if I have any objections, I'd have to.
It's a roll call vote.
Okay, it's a roll call vote. All right, well, let's get to it. Thank you, everyone. I guess first on the agenda is, can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve, Todd Callahan.
Second, Mike Moore.
Right. All right, so Jared, I can't accept just any objection?
Correct. Julia will move through a roll call.
Okay, so I will call out, I'm not sure if everybody's here, but this will give us an idea of who's here and who's not. Steve Kirk, yay or nay?
Can I just ask one clarifying question? Thanks, everyone. I was not able to attend the previous meeting where I think there was discussion around, priorities of members of the panel. I would just like to see if, I don't know if this is the time or in the minutes, but that, written priorities that were submitted prior to that first meeting somehow get either recognized, acknowledged, whether in the minutes or not, I don't care, but otherwise, yay.
Yeah, I believe Tom Shields took everybody's priorities, so we'll be sure to send those to you as well as in the minutes. Okay, Mike Trupiano. Not here. Alex Hay. Not here. Ron Bergstrom.
Yes.
Okay, Alan Renkrell. Amy Croteau. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Amy Croteau.
Yay.
Bill Doyle. Bob Colby. He said he was going to be late, I think. Mike DeVasto.
Yes.
This is just for the agenda. Seth Garfield. Not here. Dale Levitt.
Yay.
Jim Abbott. Renee Gagne is not here. Josh Reitzma.
Yay.
John LeBeau.
Aye.
Lisa Rhodes. Not here. Mike Moore.
Aye.
Todd Callahan.
Yes.
Jim Peters. Rebecca Roush. Mindy Dome.
Yes.
And Dan McKiernan.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, great. With no objections. Next is to review and approval of the November 18th draft minutes. Are there
Do you
any?
want to add the amendment proposed by Steve to that?
And Michael second.
Certainly. So Jared, describe how you would be amending those minutes.
I believe Steve asked for a list of the objectives of the panel members to be included or appended to the minutes, and that would be amended as such.
All right. So this would be a motion to accept the
I'd
minutes.
first
as
ask if there's
presented.
any additional proposed amendments. If there are, please raise your hand.
Hi, Dan. This is Mike Moore. Usual procedure is we'd make a motion to put the minutes to make a motion to accept the minutes. And then once that motion is made and seconded, then you accept amendments. So just Robert's Rules of Order. I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
A second. Dale Levitt.
Now we're open for changes.
All right. So why don't we hear from Steve Kirk? Just briefly describe again what you would like to see in those changes.
I'd like to see the minutes reflect the previously submitted written commentary, priorities from panelist members in the meeting minutes.
As an appendix?
That'd be fine.
Okay. Any objections to that? Have any further discussion?
I don't
Just-
see.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, this is Mike Moore. Could we, is this a document that we could see just so we could take a look at it, then vote to attach it? Is there something to be shared on the screen?
They were all submitted separately by each person, so we would need to compile it into a PDF before we did that.
So Mike Moore, these would all be individual comments that members or panelists have sent in that are part of the public record, and we would just be attaching those.
So I don't have objection, just as, do we want to have those changes made, added to the draft minutes and vote on the minutes next time? Or do you feel comfortable that does everyone feel comfortable this is a complete set of data they're familiar with? Okay.
I don't see any objections, but Mike DeVasto has his hand up, so Mike.
I
go
was
ahead.
just wondering, I missed that last meeting. I wasn't able to attend. Were those objectives read or included as part of that meeting? Were those objectives submitted? Because I submitted objectives. I'm just wondering if they were included in any way in the meeting itself.
Tom gave a summary of what everybody submitted. So if you submitted something to him, then it was probably included in his summary. It may not have been word for word, but he kind of gave a 100-foot view of what everybody said and compiled that way.
And also keep in mind that a copy of the PowerPoint summarizing people's objectives, the panelists' objectives, were provided from included in meeting materials from the July 18th meeting. And you should be able to find them there.
Should we proceed to a roll call vote or if anybody has any other edits to the minutes?
Yeah, so as chair, I'll just say, Mike Moore, I'm confident that because these are all public record, that we would just attach these correspondences to the back of the minutes as requested, and I'm not concerned about the fate of doing that. I think that would be fine.
That's fine. I'm ready to vote.
Okay, thanks. right.
Ron Bergstrom,
Just a technical point. I don't think there was a second to the motion to amend. So if not, then I'll second it.
yeah, we haven't moved for a motion to accept the amended minutes yet. We're still looking for additional amendments.
Now I'm seconding that motion.
I'm not seeing any additional proposed amendments to the November meeting minutes. Is there a motion to accept the amended minutes? Ron, do you want to make the motion?
I will make such a motion, yes.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it, Amy Croto.
Thank you, Amy. Any further discussion? Please raise your hand.
I don't
I'm
see
not seeing
hands.
any further discussion. Julia, can you proceed to a roll call?
Yep. Okay, we'll go Lisa Rhodes. She's here, but I don't.
Here.
Oh, so we need a yay or a nay to approve the amended meeting. Okay, Ron Bergstrom,
Yes.
Alan Renkrell,
Yes.
Mike DeVasto.
I'll abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay. Amy Croto.
Yay.
John LeBeau,
Abstain.
Josh Reitzma,
Yes.
Mike Moore,
Aye.
Mike Trupiano, Mike Trupiano, you're on mute. No, okay, we'll come back. Mindy Dome,
Abstain.
Todd Callahan,
Yes.
Steve Kirk,
Also abstain.
okay. Sean Bowen,
Yes.
Okay, I believe that's everybody who's in attendance. If I missed you, please speak up, but I'm pretty sure that was,
Dale Levitt is an aye.
okay. Right,
Mike Trupiano is an aye.
and that's everyone.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on to opening statement from the director. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. This is our second meeting. I feel like we're still in the formative stage of this panel. And so I really would urge each of you to give us, and me particularly, any feedback on the conduct of the meetings, the scheduling of the meetings, the sharing of the materials. You know, anything that we're doing, I'd like to hear the feedback so we can meet your expectations as well as the public's. So as Jared mentioned earlier, the website is up, and I'd urge all the members to become familiar with it. I'd also like to welcome Mindy Daum today. This is her first meeting. She took over the House Chair of Natural Resources from Carolyn Dykema, who did attend our meeting in November. And I just want to say I'm really appreciative of the legislative presence, because at some point we are going to be talking about something that the legislature is going to be interested in. And so having you here today as an informed member, we really appreciate that. And we really,
recording in progress.
We really appreciate your participation.
Thank you.
So I do want to say that over the past 4 months, DMF has been focusing on a lot of things, including, I guess, what's happening in a lot of workplaces, the Great Resignation. You know, we've had some HR challenges, we've had some retirees, we've had some resignations, we've had some transfers of staff. So honestly, in addition to our normal, policy and regulatory and normal Shellfish work, we've had to deal with a lot of HR issues as we try to fill the ranks and refill the ranks. And Jeff's going to get into that briefly. Also, the constable training course that you're going to hear about today, which is established in legislation, Chapter 130, Section 98, has taken a lot of time, particularly of Tom Shields, who is my staff liaison to this panel. And we've been working with the Mass Shellfish Officers Association diligently to not allow another year to pass without having the training. And you're going to hear today about the efforts to make this kind of a virtual course using many of the technologies and methods that we're using today to bring people together from the comfort of their offices and computers instead of traveling to the Mass Maritime for a 10-day continuous session. I also want to try to look forward, possibly with amended legislation on Section 98 to figure out the best way to move training into the future. Right now, Mass Maritime Academy is the named institution to conduct that training, and we might want to reconsider that and ask the legislature for some changes. Also, during this meeting, I want to create 2 subcommittees to guide some of our work into bulk tagging and also the transfers of municipal shellfish aquaculture licenses. I believe at the last meeting, we all agreed not to refer to that particular initiative with the name of the legislator who filed the bill. Josh is a great guy, and somehow his name was permanently affixed to that issue. So because that legislation is not in play, and what we want to do is create a study of those issues. This is something that came up frequently in the Mass Shellfish Initiative, and so we do want to do a study of municipalities' policies and practices of transferring municipal shellfish aquaculture licenses. We want to set that committee, set up that subcommittee today. and get to that. That was definitely one of the deliverables from the Mass Shellfish Initiative strategic plan. And then finally, there may be a need for a special meeting to assist MIPA with something that's called an aquaculture special procedure for licensing. It's pretty complicated. It's down in the weeds, but MIPA has asked DMF to bring this forward to the Shellfish Advisory Panel to get feedback. My understanding is with the upcoming change of administration, things that have kind of been backburned are being front-burned now, and I know they want to get this done before the end of the year. And if I believe Chrissy is on, and I may ask her to speak to that toward the end of the meeting. So at this time, I'm going to call on, or I can take any questions if there's any questions regarding my comments. If not, I'll move it right into Jeff Kennedy's comments. Are there any questions?
Not seeing any questions.
Great. Okay. So thank you again, everyone. Jeff Kennedy, who's the state shellfish program leader, I'm going to turn the discussion over to you next to give us an update on DMF's activities, including personnel changes.
Jeff, your audio isn't coming through that well.
Try a different microphone. How does that work?
That works, yep. Do you need to share your screen?
There we go. We've had a lot of personnel changes. It seems like there's a change every week, or in this case, this week, a couple of changes. I want to go back and my backfill for the Gloucester Shellfish Supervisor is Greg Betancourt. Greg has been with the Shellfish program since 2006, I believe. Quite a long time, and he's been an area biologist, and now he is supervising the North Shore, both the shellfish purification plant and the Gloucester staff. Neil Churchill, you'll remember, a longtime area biologist. Neil retired just before the pandemic in November of 2019. Neil has been rehired as a contractor. He is assisting Brianne in the laboratory in New Bedford. Brianne Shanks has been promoted from bacteriologist 1 to the BACT supervisor, backfilling behind Sue Bowler, who retired last June. So there's a lot of changes going on there. Jennifer Pontiatowski was a bacteriologist, splitting her time between Gloucester laboratory and the Newburyport lab. She has resigned and moved on. Anod Sandbank, also an aquatic biologist, the one down in New Bedford, has resigned. She has a new job. Sean Fallon, many of you know, he was a 2-year contractor, and he helped with a lot of sampling. You probably saw him out in the boats and collecting samples down in New Bedford. Excuse me. His contract is over, and probably the biggest, the most recent news here is Greg Sawyer has retired as of the 1st of February, and that's a big change down in the New Bedford office. So Greg was around. He was with us for 36 years, so that's a longtime employee. We're going to be missing his experience and his knowledge and contacts, certainly. But very fortunately, we have Matt Camisa. Matt transferred into that Greg's vacant position. Matt was a senior biologist on resource assessment down in New Bedford, and he is transferred to SMAS West to the Shellfish office. Matt's doing a great job, and he certainly has quite a learning curve ahead of him, parachuting into Shellfish. Tom has been relocated to Boston. He is now the SAP coordinator, as you know, and the MSOA liaison. Just this week, we have Jake Madden has started as a bacteriologist 1 in Newburyport, working for Diane Regan. Jake comes to us from Spinney Creek in Maine, the depuration plant. We're very happy to have him. And also on the North Shore, Devin Winkler she has resigned. She has a new position with MWRA, so we wish her the best. That leaves 2 backfills for the aquatic biologist 2 positions in Gloucester that are vacant and need to be filled. Both Greg Betancourt's position and now Devin. So that's we're shorthanded a couple people in Gloucester. We're also in the process of hiring 2 bacteriologist 1s, one for Gloucester to backfill Jen Pontiatowski, and one to backfill Brianne in New Bedford. And we will be backfilling as well Anot's biologist position. So we have quite a few changes going on. With this reshuffle, now Greg Betancourt reports to me, Chrissy Pettipass in aquaculture reports directly to me, as well as Matt Camisa. So those are our senior staff for Shellfish. So there's quite a few changes going on. We went for years and it seemed like nothing ever changed. And now we have a whole new list of positions and individuals. So you can't tell the players without a program. So this is your program. If you have any questions on this, I can answer that. I also will be talking a little bit later, and I'll be here for the whole meeting. So any questions about any other items, we can probably follow up with a little bit later.
I'm not
Julia?
seeing any hands, Jeff.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. The next thing I want to talk about is the Shellfish Constable appointments and training. This was, as I mentioned earlier, an issue that Tom Shields has been spending an inordinate amount of time over the last 2 months. And what happened was, and I'll just give a little bit of background on Section 98. Actually, I think Section 98 was included in the materials at the back end of the document. Julia, could you bring that up?
Yeah.
That's the final document in the back. Thank you.
Are you able to see it?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. It was 98.
Yeah, so Section 98 of Chapter 130 is the section of law that establishes the creation of shellfish constables, their appointment, powers and duties, and the notice of appointment. And what it does is because other areas of state law give municipalities local control over shell fisheries, this is the obvious accompaniment to that, which is municipal authorities enforce those municipal laws, but they also can enforce other state shellfish related laws as well. For example, in the section, it mentions that constables can enforce Section 31 of Chapter 130, which is destruction to fish weirs, pound nets, or fish traps. 37, which is the lobster and crab rules, including the licensing of lobsters and crabs. If someone's taking lobsters and crabs without a license, they can be cited by the constable. Section 41, which is a taking or selling of female lobsters bearing eggs. Section 43, which is conditions for taking egg-bearing lobsters, and 44 sale or possession of short lobsters, mutilated lobsters, etc. So this particular, these authorities go way back, multi-decades ago, but it's interesting that that the legislature, sort of seeks the assistance for the enforcement of these rules from the constables. The other notable part of this section has to do with a shellfish training course, which is identified in the statute. And Henry Lind is on today, and Henry has a long memory and long years of experience. Could probably add more to this conversation, but the Mass Maritime Academy is identified as the institution to conduct a training, and as a result of taking that training, a constable or a deputy constable would be considered validly trained and experienced. And in the past, there was 2 one-week periods, and I believe that in our conversations at the SAP last meeting in November, one of the members, and it was either Amy or it was Renee Gagné, and I apologize, I can't remember which, pointed out that this is one of their priorities, is to get dedicated resources to creating this kind of or improve the program and commitment, because up till now, the Mass Shellfish Officers Association, working with DMF staff, have put it together, and we've been really fortunate to have Henry Lind, who's done so much work on this historically, and he continues to do that. But I don't think we can continue to rely on Henry forever. So this gave us an opportunity to do more on this, to put in more resources, more time. Obviously, we're facing a COVID situation where back in December and January, when people would need to sign up for this February course, many applicants probably were not comfortable attending. I know a lot of the instructors weren't comfortable attending. So this was going to be the course that wasn't given last year. So the routine was to give this course every other year, but it had been 3 years now since it was given. And so we really didn't want to have another year pass without this important training course. And so Tom and the MSOA leadership teamed up, and we got into discussions of how we can make how we can salvage the training program, basically using the kind of technologies that we're using today in our meeting with Zoom calls and virtual attendance, et cetera. So there is a list of all the courses. So there are many, I don't know, there must be at least over 20 instructors. So we bring in staff from many different agencies, including Office of Law Enforcement, Mass Environmental Police, as well as some of the MSOA leadership and Department of Public Health, et cetera. So up on the screen is the extensive list of courses. And so what we've decided to do is go with a half-day sessions, but I'm not going to get into this too much because I believe Henry's going to talk about that. But I just wanted to point out sort of the background here is that DMF is trying to step up and make this a more, I'm going to say more formal program, but we want to contribute more to this. We think that there's opportunities going forward for more virtual learning. It was interesting when we were on the call with some of the older and younger constables. Many of the younger ones who just got out of college and dealing with virtual classes were pretty comfortable with the idea, whereas some of the older ones not so much. So so we are working on that. We noticed that that the issue about Mass Maritime is there. We're going to be in contact with Mass Maritime to see if it may not be appropriate to maybe strike that and to have other options, either other institutions, other colleges, or just do it ourselves if it's going to be virtual. That's still a work in progress, but we might be coming to the legislature for that. The other thing that came up, which was really interesting, was the issue about having this training in the face of police reform, because constables do have the authority to arrest anyone who doesn't display their catch upon demand of the constable, which is, I guess, the first step of enforcing anything is requiring the harvester to show what they've got in terms of the permit that they hold and the shellfish in their possession. And so there was some serious discussion or concerns or doubts as to whether this training session could and should go forward, because the concern was that maybe under this Police Reform Act, because they have the powers of arrest, that suddenly this training isn't enough and it needs to be wrapped up into the larger police reform training, which is being performed by something called the Post Commission. And so you're going to hear in a few minutes of a survey that we did. The question was put to me by members of the environmental police, the senior team, as that, well, how, as they're trying to figure out how to move forward, the question is, well, how often does a constable arrest somebody? And so we looked into that and we want to share that with you. And then in the end, I think we had a pretty good resolution on some of these outstanding questions. So I think we want to maybe at this point move on to Tom Shields' presentation on the survey. So again, the background for this was, well, first we wanted to figure out, if we were going, if the police reform bill was going to put a major monkey wrench into the planned training, we were wondering if it would be prudent to seek legislative change about those powers of arrest. Is that an easy out? Otherwise, each municipality might have to invest tons of time and money in training, and we didn't know if that was the right approach. And then we also wanted to just get more information about different towns and their constables, or whether they already had that training, or whether, if by virtue of them being within a police force or a harbor master's office, if that training was already established, was already planned. And then where does the Police Reform Act, how is it going to affect those other entities such as a harbor master? Because many harbor masters also have the authority to arrest. So at this time, Tom, why don't I ask you to give your presentation?
Okay. If I can share my screen.
If there are any questions, let's hold off until Tom finishes his, because I think you'll get some more insights from Tom's presentation.
Okay. Great. Can people see that?
Yeah, but you need to go from the beginning.
I'll set up the slideshow. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for all being here today.
I think you're on slide 8, Tom. There you go.
I know, I'm just trying to get back up here. Yeah, as Dan gave a great background and lead into a survey that I conducted of constables throughout this Commonwealth, and it was an interesting process, and I enjoyed working with folks. Basically, we're trying to find as many towns as we could, but we didn't really have time or resources to interview everybody. So what we did was I chose 24 towns spread out throughout the area, throughout the Commonwealth, to talk to constables and see what we could do in terms of gathering information we need. And you can see on the screen the distribution and the number of towns that were interviewed. Sorry. But the overall, we interviewed 24 constables and throughout the coast, and we were we didn't really know what to expect, but the take home really is that 82% of the constables we interviewed did not have any recall or did not arrest any individuals on the flats over the last 20 years related to shellfish violations. Falmouth reported 3 to 4 arrests since 2013. New Bedford had by far the most, with approximately 20 arrests over the last 10 years. And what we tried to do is demonstrate the or try to give a summary of how many incidents there were that occurred within the last 10 years. How many number of incidents did shellfish constables encounter with people refusing to display their catch? And it was basically determined that 10 of the 24 town constables that were interviewed reported dealing with non-compliance to display catch. 10 of the constables reported that there were no arrests resulting from any encounters of this kind for non-display. Most individuals found in violation on the flats were issued citations requiring payment of fines as determined by their local municipality. New Bedford reported 7 to 8 individuals were arrested with the assistance of New Bedford police as a result of these encounters, and EPOs assisted in the arrest of 1 individual in each of the 3 towns of Wareham, Orleans, and Wellfleet, again, over the last 15 years. The next thing we were curious about, Dan was wanting to know what other activities or duties are shellfish constables required to be performing in the various towns we interviewed. And as it turns out, there are constables of the 24 towns that we interviewed. 15 towns have placed additional responsibilities and duties on shellfish constables. It's a busy slide on the left or table on the left, but you can see the how other assignments have been distributed to different constables in different towns. Only 9 of the 24 constables that were interviewed are exclusively shellfish constables. They have no other assigned duties, either harbor master, assistant harbor master, Department of Natural Resources officer, or police officer. And then out of the 24 towns we interviewed, Hingham was the only town that the constable was also a police department. Actually, the shellfish constable position is placed directly under the guidance and direction of the municipal police department. And the other interesting thing we found out from this interview is that despite not being police or auxiliary police, constables and deputy constables in 6 of the interviewed municipalities have received some sort of police training. And that would be a variety of programs depending on the age and the type of training that they did receive, but they did have and are some sort of police training. So the summary of what we did determine from the survey is that 82% of constables have reported no arrests related to shellfish violations in their towns, in recent history anyway. 8% of interviewed constables reported arrests to shellfish violations during the last 20 years. And during this 20-year period, 4 municipalities reported that arrests were made with their assistance of either local municipal police and or environmental police officers. Basically, no arrests were conducted by the shellfish constables themselves. 10 of the constables reported they dealt with non-compliance with the request to display their catch for inspection over the last 10 years. And then over this period, no arrests were conducted by constables or deputy constables. Most violators were fined in these cases and required to return their catch to the flats. Constables in 9 towns have no additional duties, and in the remaining 15 municipalities have additional responsibilities, either harbor master, assistant harbor master, or natural resource officer. Constables in 7 of the interviewed municipalities have received some sort of police training. So the take home from this takeaway really is that we originally planned on doing this work and interviewing in preparation for the unknown possibilities that there may be additional training required of constables as a result of the post-commission work that they're working towards. And at this time, MSOA, Environmental Police, and DMF were designed a virtual training course scheduled now for March 25th. So in link with those 2 things, we did conduct the interviews with the 24 constables. And we're looking particularly at the constable requirements and frequency of conducting arrests and exercising their powers of arrest under Chapter 130, Section 98. We gathered this information in order to use it as an informal to help us with making informed decisions about whether or not to amend Section 98 in light of possible police reform. So the final analysis is really powers of arrest are rarely employed by Shellfish constables. And although rarely employed, many of the constables pointed out the importance of maintaining the authority to arrest as defined in Section 98. This authority provides significant leverage to constables in performing of their routine duties of enforcing state and municipal shellfish regulations. Although nothing has been officially announced, the post-commission will likely exempt shellfish constables from mandatory police training. And we're looking forward to getting more information about that. I believe that the post-commission is looking at another meeting sometime in March, and there'll hopefully be more resolution about clarifying whether this will in fact be the case of excluding constables from mandatory training. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So just to summarize, we really thought we were in some trouble developing the constable course because of the new police reform. But I think, when we investigated this, and there's been a lot of communication back and forth with the post-commission from many of the members of the constable community through MSOA, I think the resolution is going to be a good one in the end. So I think this is very revealing. I also just want to point out, and I think Henry's going to speak to the training course in a minute here, but if the members of this panel are interested in viewing any of these training sessions, they're certainly welcome to do that. I believe, right, Jared, this is a Zoom account that can accommodate a pretty large number of participants. And so, some of this information is going to be really interesting, especially for those of you who are on this panel with kind of a narrow range of knowledge because of your personal experience. You might find some of these sessions to be really educational. So we can take some questions on this, or maybe just go to Henry's presentation and take questions after that. How does that sound?
Dan, sorry to interrupt. I just
ahead.
wanted to add one thing is that Peter Seminara, who's the Shellfish Constable in Gloucester.
Yeah,
he did submit a letter to the Shellfish Advisory Panel dealing with his support for maintaining the authority under Section 98. And the letter, we did provide a copy of his letter to the panel in the materials that we posted on the website.
Yeah, and thank you, Tom. I overlooked that. And I think Pete's conclusion can be summed up as, well, it hasn't been needed it's a nice tool to have in terms of getting compliance. Having the powers of arrest, even if you don't use it, can bring about compliance in an enforcement situation. So anyway, I think the bottom line for me is that maybe 2 months ago, I was envisioning the need for a rewrite of Section 98 that would that could address this, just because it seemed like kind of a train wreck if every constable and deputy constable was going to be required to go through months and months of intensive police training. Doesn't seem to be the case. And so going forward, I still think it may be worthwhile to examine Section 98 for amendments about training, specifically the Mass Maritime linkage, if that institution doesn't want to stay as involved as they have in the past. But this is a work in progress, and we'll bring this back to the full panel before we dream up any other amendments. But right now, that's the only thing I can see asking the legislature to change within Section 98. So Henry Lind, can you give us a brief overview of the upcoming training and the degree to which some of our panel members could maybe listen in on some of these sessions?
Good morning. Thank you, Dan. I'd be happy to do that. Excuse me. And I do have a brief PowerPoint to outline what we've put together to help.
Henry, you should be able to share your screen.
Yep, it should be coming up right now. There it is. My bag, I know a lot of the folks on the board. If you're not familiar with me, I am retired from town of Eastham. I worked under the auspices of a chap named Phil Schwind in the late 70s, early 70s, who was instrumental in having the Mass Shellfish Officers Association established, and we have been working hand in glove with the division and OLE for all these many years. I retired in 2009 after spending 35 years with the town, and was tapped on the shoulder shortly after that and said, we need some help with our training program. Would you be willing to help with that? Oh, sure, why not? I've got nothing else to do. Education is a very, very important part of, in my opinion, going forward and adapting to the changes that are inevitable. And the more we educate our members, the more we educate the public, the better everybody's going to be. So the reason for this is because we, have this, as most of us are familiar with, a very unusual management scheme compared to many other states. We've got lots of different conditions. Every town is special. Every town is the best. Every town's species are the only place to find them. The politics in every town are politics. Home rule rules. And so we need this need for collaboration. Chapter 130, Section 98 actually was implemented long after we began the process of training shellfish constables. The goals are to have all of the members, all of the constables, and all of the people who have an appointment as a constable, we can touch on that a little bit later, to understand all of the issues. And there's a lot, if you look at that syllabus, there is a lot of material there. There's actually 61 or 2 different presentations, and they vary, a wide range of things that encompass the daily duties of being a constable. It also, in our opinion, helps confidence building for an individual who oftentimes works solo on the flats, may have a radio to summon help, maybe not, but to include education as well as enforcement as a hand-in-glove tool. And then, of course, administration, because you just got to do all the paperwork, and understanding of all of that is pretty important. So the other piece of what we expose our students to is the fact that there are resources. There are people at the division or OLE or other federal agencies that they can turn to for help. They're not necessarily going to be tapped on the shoulder by a federal agency to say, how can we help you guys? But they need to know that if they have a problem, that these agencies are available and ready. But we began this initiative in 1995. We were at Mass Maritime at the invitation of a chap named Cam Gifford. Many of you probably remember Cam. He was a powerhouse of the First Order. And he began an association with Sea Grant Woods Hole. And his comment was, well, why don't we use the sea term at Mass Maritime when the campus is empty, all of the cadets are offshore, and we'll put together some kind of a course. What are we going to do? Well, I don't know. Let's throw a couple of weeks at it. Okay, so that's 80 hours. Just pulled a number out of a hat. We started in 1995.
Excuse me, Henry?
Yes.
Kevin Clayton, your slides are not advancing, so you might want to have, unless there's a video issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Julia, what's the best way to handle that?
Why don't you try clicking from beginning up in the top left corner there?
Because I'm sharing them on my screen and they're sharing fine. I don't have that.
Henry, Jared Silva here. Are you using multiple screens?
No, I'm just sharing my screen with what we had. So I stopped the share. Maybe Julia, do you want to run it?
Yeah, did you, let me see. I don't know that I have that presentation. Hang on. Henry, did you send this?
Yes, I did send it to you. If nothing else, this is a good trial run for what we're going to be doing next week for the next 3 weeks.
I have it. Hang on one second.
Okay.
All right. What slide should I start it at?
When did they stop? Do we have any idea?
It didn't advance at all for us.
Well, let's just start at the beginning and we'll just jump quickly through it.
Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes, Julia, it's up.
Okay. Henry, you can go ahead.
Okay, I don't see a forward or back button.
I'll hit, yeah, just let me know when you want me to advance it and I can do that.
Okay. Yeah, why don't we advance 2 or 3, Julia, right, we'll get to the heart of the matter. Probably most of the details I've had here are not that new business to anybody.
Yeah, I think, Henry, you're around slide 4 in history.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that works. So Cam Gifford was the spark plug that started this, working with the MSOA. He developed the program for us, and it was through the continuing education part of the Mass Maritime Academy. Cam was involved with that. He guided us through the 2-week session concept, which was, yeah, the sea term is underway. I got to tell you, the mess hall was probably the best part of being there. If you've had the opportunity to dine at the mess hall at Mass Maritime, it's definitely an experience. And basically, we went on 3-year intervals after that, simply because trying to assemble a course of 15 or 20 people, constables, to dedicate 2 weeks of time away from their town was very tricky. And in order to make it cost effective to pull in all of the presenters from the division and OLE and everybody else, we really needed about 20 people. So it was around 3-year intervals. I started in 2011, which is the first year that I was involved with that. We could go to the next one, Julie. And we have evolved over time. Initially, it was all constables, and constables at the time in the 1990s, early 2000s, were the constable was just a constable or a deputy constable. We did not typically have towns deciding that Shellfish constables were perhaps not a standalone department, so they were inviting harbor masters to also become Shellfish constables. They had some police officers designated as Shellfish constables, and occasionally we'd have just an individual from the general public that said, "What do you guys do anyway?" So obviously we had them invited too. We did charge, or the Maritime Academy charged a tuition, which was largely use of the hall, technical equipment, and the mess hall, and went along reasonably smoothly with an enormous amount of effort by an awful lot of people. I will point it out, it's 100% volunteer effort. No dimes have changed hands in the entire process, right from the get-go. Next slide, please. So COVID made the big change. We started thinking about this program back in August, July. What are we going to do? Delta had shown up. It was diminishing. We were hopeful. We started reaching out to all the presenters, started working with Tom, who has been a fabulous resource to assist us in every inch of the way. And we were actually set and locked and loaded to start in February this year with the traditional 2-week in-person. When Omicron showed up, then we started rethinking about it. And the Maritime Academy was mask only, vaccination requirements. In December, it was touch and go whether they were even going to have the campus open. So we did a pivot, and we were invited by Dan to try, well, let's see some kind of a Zoom situation. Went back to the Maritime Academy. They did not have that capacity. As the extension service, they would have to have every student enrolled as a student, as a cadet, in order to allow their IT people to put something together. So the pivot was, okay, here's the material that we think we need to cover. How are we going to do it without killing people with PowerPoint purgatory in front of the screen? It's bad enough to sit in the classroom for 5 days a week, 8 to 5, and hope that the weather doesn't close the campus down. But Zoom webinars can be deadly. And so we put together a program, and that's the syllabus that's attached here. As of today, we have 47, give or take. We got some coming in yesterday and a couple just dropped out this morning. We have 51 presenters and actually 66 different presentations, if you do the arithmetic on that syllabus. Next slide, please. And this is roughly what you see. Basically, we tell the students it's the challenges of being a clam in an imperfect world. And the imperfect world includes over-harvesting, undersize, pollution, diseases, everything else. What are the tools? Building a network so that you can ask for help when you need it, because no person is an island. And then some real world stuff, which is bringing us old guys in to say, okay, this is the way we handle things. And in case in point was this discussion about the opportunity to arrest for failure to display. And as Tom pointed out with his interviews, it's a good tool to have. You don't want to use it, but our feeling is that it's a very dangerous tool if it's used improperly, and that puts everybody at risk. So that's why our training includes a good deal about that. Next slide, please. This is a whole group of people that are helping us. As I said, all volunteers, different agencies are sending people, adjusting their schedules. It makes a rather varied and diverse outlook. And in short order, in 2 weeks' time, or in this case, 3 weeks' time, the students are asked to absorb an awful lot of information that is very diverse. And we go easy on them. We don't really give them a killer exam at the end, but it's certainly enough so that we understand that 70% passing grade means that they are well qualified, as the legislation suggests. Next slide, please. And I'll point out that the legislation didn't actually get implemented until a decade after we started this. And it was basically a recognition by the legislature that, yes, these are the kinds of things that we need to know. And let's put it in writing someplace so that a board of selectmen or appointing authority understands that the folks that are here serving the town or city as a constable have training, they have an understanding of all the things that go into being a constable, and gives them some assurance. It's not by any means bulletproof or an absolute guarantee that the constable is not going to do things that the town is not going to be happy about, but it's a good start. So what's coming up? Good question. We're going to be beginning this next Monday. We have a similar kind of arrangement with all the technical glitches that could happen. Thank you very much to Julia and Tom and everybody else at DMF for making it happen. We are up to about 45 or 50 people, which is double what we've ever seen before, which is good. A lot of complaints about, well, that's still too much time. And having it set at a mornings only and no recording due to the fact that we're not confident that the material that we recorded and made public as a public document would not be used adversely. So it looks like some kind of a learning management system is probably going to be the thing that we're going to have to look at. And as Dan pointed out, the younger folks say, yeah, sure, I'm doing that all the time. We're getting a master's degree online. It works. You dial it up when you have time and you can study it. You go back and restudy it. You can take your exams and you then are qualified. You've had all the training that goes into whatever that course is all about. It would solve a lot of issues. It doesn't solve all of the issues. It doesn't have FaceTime. It doesn't have the ability to, see who this person is that is going to help me or whom I could give some assistance to. But it would certainly alleviate the fact that many people just are not able to attend just because of the time constraints. Of course, the very last bottom line there is the dollars. And LMS systems are not cheap. They're complicated to put together. They are time consuming to put together, and they cost a lot of money, not only to assemble, but also to host and maintain in the future. So I am offering this to the panel as an introduction as to where we are today and where we think that we're going to be heading. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Henry. That was a great presentation. I'd also like to point out that you talk about volunteers, but many of the people involved with this have day jobs, and this is part of their day job. But that's different for you because you're truly retired, but you stay involved. And I really want to thank you for your incredible contributions and your continued true volunteering. We really appreciate your contributions. So this would be a good time to take some questions on all aspects of this presentation. Any hands?
Mike DeVosto?
Hey. Yeah, I was just thinking that, it makes sense to have it online, and even though the cost might be more upfront, doing this every so often, actually holding seminars and running classes can't be cheap either, especially with time commitments from people and staff. So I just think, something similar to like the Mass Ethics Board type exam system where you go through each thing and then do that, and then maybe having a like 1 day question and answer type seminar, either you know, in the middle of it before you have any exam type thing or whatever that you do to get your certification of completion might be worthwhile to look at too. But certainly it seems like a lot of hours for people to be able to, even if they are hired to do that, to get on specific times that overlap with when these courses would be available. So that's my 2 cents. I think, you know, moving it online and having people just complete it, and then maybe some additional resource where there's some FaceTime for Q&A and different extenuating circumstances that people might want to, you know, bring to the attention of the state or have answered would help.
Thanks, Mike. Any other hands?
Ron
Jared?
Bergstrom?
Yeah, hi. I think that Michael just touched on this, but you know, an example is the conflict of interest training that we all have to go through, or some of us have to go through in the state, where there's a course and then it goes back and they ask you individual questions. If you don't have the answers, you go back again and again. I mean, that would be a bare bones approach to training, especially the assistant constables, because I know in my town, you know, Renee has a lot of work. A lot of it is in the office. In the summer, we might have, you know, 6 or 8 or more assistant shellfish constables. Some of them are retired. You know, some of them only work a couple days a week. I'm sure they're all willing to take training, but we should make it as easy as possible for them. I'd also like to go back to what we discussed right at the top of this about police powers. As I said, a lot of these are part-time retired people. It's unlikely, if they're confronted with a difficult situation, someone refusing to cooperate, that they're going to be in a position to arrest them, even though they may have that power. I would advise against it. It's only happened a couple times in my town, but basically you have to be able to call in the cavalry. We have harbor masters are always on the water during the summer. Police are available. The only exception to that is if someone is digging in a polluted area, in a closed area, you have to make sure that catch doesn't get to market. So it's a bigger issue than what we've touched on. Not a question of just police powers. Is what do you do if you're out in the middle of Nantucket Sound and someone, you know, with a part-time shellfish officer and someone refuses to cooperate. So it takes a lot of organization between the police, the harbor master, and the shellfish constable. So I don't know if it's unique to Chatham, but I know there must be other towns facing the same situation. Anyway, that's what I have.
Thanks, Ron.
If I could just briefly address the mass ethics training session caught my eye early on in this discussion. And I got in touch with the director of that program, David Giannotti, who actually presents at the in-person trainings. And I asked him, how did that evolve? And he said, well, we had a deal. Somebody in the Commonwealth had an opportunity to put that together for us when the statute was initiated. He said it was approximately $1 million to assemble that training session. And he said, I think we got a discount. And if I'm sorry, all of us, and I'm still taking that course as a volunteer on a couple of town committees, it's about a half an hour to maybe a 45-minute training session. It does not cover anywhere near the amount of stuff that we're talking about. So we're looking at something like a college curriculum course that would be, you know, a 3-credit equivalent. When we compare this with what the training requirements are for a harbor master, it's dwarfed. Harbor masters require something on the order of 3 years of time for various courses that are required. So we're nowhere near that level yet, but and as Ron pointed out, it's impossible for a shellfish constable wearing a pair of boots to effect an arrest. So it's always a cooperative event with the local PD, but that goes to, this whole training session, and that is to work cooperatively with your other departments. I had one instance where that was the case, and there's no way in the world I'm going to walk out on the flats and handcuff somebody. So that's why we have the PD there.
Thanks, Henry. Steve Kirk?
I had a question either for Tom or anyone. Tom, thanks for your presentation on doing your survey work. That I understand was very much focused on the responses from the constables. It's interesting to sort of hear the numbers of, where a constable was exercising their right for arrest. Do you have a sense, or is it easy to find out, environmental police involvement that was not coinciding with constables, which might give a more, you take both of those pieces of information and get a good sense of how many shellfish violations are happening in a year? Just curious about that.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That's a good point. I focused our interviews with constables only, and I didn't go into the weeds talking to other agencies or municipal folks in the towns. And if the panel thinks it's something worth investigating, it certainly can follow up on that. But I do think that this was just trying to get a broad stroke concept of what really is happening and how many arrests in general are occurring on the flats. And I really didn't want to dive in further and like contacting police departments directly.
Okay, Mike DeVasto, give your hand up.
Mike, you're muted.
Hey, I just had a question. I'm also on the select board here in Wellfleet, and I know that the police reform bill has made it really difficult for police departments as far as what they can do to have sworn officers that are arresting officers. They can't even have seasonal employees anymore as sworn officers. And I'm just wondering, is this going to require, do we know yet if it'll require that constables become sworn officers in order to make arrests? And if that's the case, would it just make sense to have the arresting, like the constable able to refer someone to the Mass EPO and issue a warrant and citation rather than actually being the arresting officer? I could see, Wellfleet's not really the same as some other municipalities, but I could see in some other areas where, this could be kind of dangerous for a constable to be making arrests on boarding boats and stuff like that. So, yeah, those are the questions.
Yeah,
Mike.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom. I'll let you.
No, I was just going to say, Mike, that the few incidents of arrest during the 10-year period that we were focusing on carried out by constables, or at least in which constables were involved, they all were assisted by either the municipal police department to actually conduct arrests, or in some cases, environmental police officers assisted and actually carried out the arrests. So I think most of the constables, the 24 constables I interviewed, are well aware of the risks involved. And if it looked like things were ramping up to be confrontational, that's when they would call in assistance, either municipal police or the EPOs as well. And I should point out that Wareham, New Bedford, and in some degree Gloucester, all of these sorts of issues, and everyone seems to be in sync and working with either local police or EPOs.
And Mike, to your question about sort of what's the final determination, that is up to the post commission, and we're awaiting some final, policy to be published on this. but the early indications are that Shellfish constables won't be required to undergo this intensive training. And we're hoping for that outcome, and we're receiving some positive signs that will be the case, but it has yet to be resolved. So anyway, again, today's conversation was mainly focused on training and whether or not the police reform was going to blow up our training and change the agenda completely. We don't think that's the case, and we are proceeding with this training as planned without any changes consistent with the Police Reform Act. So my question would be for Jared. Jared, could we invite any of the members of the Shellfish Advisory Panel to drop in on any of these training sessions by registering? Is that an option?
I'd have them work that through Julia and to contact her if they are. My one concern being that if more than a quorum of members were to show up to a specific training, that would trigger open meeting law requirements and make things rather complicated. So we can manage that on the back end if they reach out to us in advance. The syllabus was distributed to them as part of the meeting material, so they should have that syllabus. And if there are certain presentations they want to attend, to just reach out to us and we can work with them to make sure they can get in.
Okay, thanks. Good stuff.
And there, I just wanted to remind the public that we are going to be taking public comment at the end of the meeting. So if you have comments or questions now, because I do see some hands raised, to just hold them and we'll get to you at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, is everyone okay moving on in the agenda? I'm assuming so among the panel members. Okay, the next is on number 4. It's
Dan, did you want me to do a brief overview of the database?
Oh yes, I'm sorry, Julia. Please do. Just
that's okay.
Briefly.
So yeah, for a while, we did not have a repository for Shellfish constable reappointments. So I will share my screen and show you what we have come up with. We now have a database that houses all of the reappointments. Let me just make sure I'm there.
And Julia, this is a requirement under Section 98 that the municipality contact the Division of Marine Fisheries about these appointments. And so this is our gathering all of it and depositing it in one location, and that could be made a public record as well.
Yeah, so basically this is the database, and as reappointments come in, we have the ability to upload the attachment so we know. And then as you know, we update the names, the town names, where their region. And so over here under the appointment where it says required info, we would need to reach out to Salisbury, which we have. We recently, I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago now, we sent out letters to all the towns requesting updated Shellfish constable information. So as that comes in, I'm able to edit each field and kind of fill in as needed the length of their term, and if they've taken the MSOA training, you know, you can hit no or yes. Some of the people where it says no, they may have taken it. We just don't have a record of it at the moment. So as that information comes in, we'll be able to update it as well. So that's really, you know, the only update that I have, but it's, you know, I'm keeping it brief, but essentially we now have a repository for all of the Shellfish constable reappointments, and we're able to track it more easily for the Shellfish program. So if anybody has questions, I can take those, but if not, we can move on to number 4 on the agenda.
Thanks, Julia. Actually, your presentation did trigger a question for me, and this would be a question to Henry or Tom. Of the folks who have signed up for the training among the constables and deputy constables, what proportion of the students are constables versus a deputy constable? Do we know, Tom? Henry?
Yeah, we do know. It's around 10 or 11 actual constables. Excuse me. Probably at least 2 times that number of deputy constables. A handful of harbor master / constable and police officer / constable, and a half a dozen for just general public.
All right, great, thank you.
But
All right, into number 4. So today I want to just leave this meeting today with the creation of a small subcommittee. During the Mass Shellfish Initiative, there was the issue that came up, which was the bill that was filed by Mass Aquaculture to the legislature to amend the statutes regarding the transfers of municipal shellfish aquaculture licenses. And it was advised to us, not to try to solve that in the Mass Shellfish Strategic Plan, or Mass Shellfish Initiative Strategic Plan, but instead to spend a little extra time and do a deep dive on it. And so we've discussed it internally, and what we would like to do is create a subcommittee to look at this. And I'd like this subcommittee to be balanced between, those who are aquaculture permit holders and those who are not, and create a survey with the input of the aquaculturists, especially those who are knowledgeable, to ask the towns, that have aquaculture licenses, about their transfer policies and their about those transactions that might have taken place in the past, so we can learn. I know in some of the early meetings of the Mass Shellfish Initiative, we had some recommendations to look at some towns that have really good programs, and maybe other towns could model what some towns are doing in terms of creating procedures and policies. And so that's something I want to endeavor this, in the next few months. And so I would like to get some volunteers for that. Again, I'd like to balance it between those who are aquaculture permit holders and those who are not. I think it would be valuable to get a couple of the representatives from municipalities, like Renee and Amy, who are municipal employees, to participate in that, as well as some of the growers. This would be chaired by someone in a DMF, most likely Tom. And so I'd like the individuals to think about that and get back to me. I'd like to keep it small, like either 4 or maybe 6 people. And it wouldn't be a heavy lift, but it would be a few conference calls like we're on today to develop this. And it was explained to me by Renee at the last meeting that because this is a fairly divisive issue at times, that we have to be really deliberate in terms of the all of the progress of this committee. And so I would just want to proceed slowly. So whatever we do, I'd like to bring back to this Shellfish Advisory Panel in terms of the survey and the results, and have an open conversation. And in the end, I don't expect this to be necessarily a position paper pro or con. I would hope that we could simply air out, the various opinions, and that way, if the legislature wants to take that up again, there would be some place to go for kind of a full explanation of the consequences, intended or unintended, of modifying that. We did have a call with some of the folks from MAA, Scott Soares, Seth Garfield was on it. I'm trying to remember who else. And we had a good conversation about the origins of that bill and what was being attempted. So we'll dust off some of those notes and bring it to this committee. So anyway, I don't want to assign it today. I'd like to just get people to volunteer that, and I'll kind of work with the individual members, but I'd like to create that after today's meeting. Any questions or any discussions people want to have on that? I'd be welcome
Ron?
to take that.
Yeah, just a quick question as to the charge of the committee. I mean, right now, the shellfishing within the jurisdiction of the towns, I know it's state waters, but it's basically up to the municipalities themselves. So are we looking now at, a survey of how each town does it, and suggesting the best way to do it for them? Or are we looking for some overall regulations to be passed by the legislature that would preempt the authority of the towns? I mean, maybe that's a question that the committee itself is going to have to answer.
Yeah.
But we have to have a sense
Yeah.
of what direction.
Yeah,
we're
let
going.
me give you an answer to that. So the statute is established, and I don't have the statute in front of me, although I think it was actually, Julia, could you pull up the statute?
Yep.
So Ron, my vision here is to sort of interview or research how each town is executing this through its procedures and policies, not to, or even if they have regulations, I don't know, but are there rules within a municipality, and if there are rules or even policies, how are those executed? Are there waiting lists? Are there do some towns allow multiple individuals on a grant? So that I'm trying to get at that aspect of how it's happening now, and then compare and contrast that, and then come back to this panel and just say, this is how it's being done in various municipalities, because I think the objective of the group that petitioned for change was looking for something that was for a change. So they were looking for something that didn't exist in the statute. I'm guessing they wanted more control over those permits, a little less discretion on the part of the municipal authorities about how those. But again, I don't want to speak for them off the cuff. But that's what I'm hoping to do, is to just do a deeper dive on how these rules are being executed now, that so motivated Mass Aquaculture Association to seek a legislative amendment, and then and take a look at that and bring it back to this panel. So it's conceivable that this, that nothing happens on this except it's a little research paper that everybody's happy with the statute as written, and so that's a real possibility. But I just feel that, having suffered through some of the pain of the Mass Shellfish Initiative and the misunderstanding of that, I just wanted to work on this a little bit and see what the issues were, and if people are comfortable leaving it as is, so be it. Or if changes are warranted, talk about change. But it wouldn't be changed by this group, and it wouldn't be changed by DMF. It would be changed by the legislature. And I think the legislature deserves kind of a full explanation of the consequences of any of those changes, which I don't think they had 4 years ago when that bill was filed. Any other comments?
Hey, Dan?
Yep.
It's Michael DeVasto.
Hey, Mike.
As far as the charge of the committee, though, are we expecting this subcommittee to make recommendations, or
No.
just bring back the information to the rest of the panel?
Yeah, so, a survey can really fall down if you don't ask the right questions. And so this we've learned from the MSI survey. This we learned from the Port Profile Project when we were asking harbor masters about, needs of the port. So if you're going to be asking questions, you have to ask the right questions. I want this group to weigh in to DMF. If we even talked about maybe hiring like a grad student or an intern or something to maybe do some of the busy work on this. But you got to ask the right questions, and I want that information to be sort of agreed upon in advance by this committee. You know what I mean? So I know you're familiar with Wellfleet, so we want to make sure that if we're going to ask Wellfleet a bunch of questions, that they're the right questions, and what comes out of this product is a true reveal on how Wellfleet deals with this issue, right? And doesn't, the question isn't so inadequate that it's masked.
Right,
That make
okay,
sense?
that makes sense. Yeah, it's not to, the scope of the subcommittee is not to make the recommendations, but to make sure that the survey is a good survey that, you know, gets to the bottom of what's going on.
Yeah, I go back to that Mass Shellfish Initiative when we went in front of the MSOA, and the MSOA membership basically spent an hour amending almost every question we had, because, you know, there was this great population of readers saying, well, I'm not sure what you mean by that, or I know that question is not going to get the answer you're looking for. So that kind of thing. I want to do this right, and I want to use the wisdom of this panel to do that. Josh?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think it's important to call it a review paper at this point, just reviewing how different municipalities handle it, and rather than make recommendations. And I just thought that maybe the Sea Grant Law Center could help out out of Roger Williams. They actually did a bunch of municipal sort of overview of regulations for the Shellfast tool. And I think they might be revisiting that soon. So they might, and they're law students, so they can certainly help from that perspective.
Right. Well, given your role in Sea Grant, I think you'd be a good member of this subcommittee.
Yeah, and I would certainly, be happy to reach out to them and see if they could, add some capacity.
All right. Thanks for that. All right. Any other hands? Not seeing any.
Not
Okay,
seeing any members of the panel there.
So members, just reach out to me, and we'll put something together over the next week. So I guess the next is the SMAS modeling of wastewater treatment plants. That's going to be presented by Jeff Kennedy. Oh, look at that.
I'll go through this pretty quick. You've seen a lot of these these slides before, so I'll go pretty quick. This is an image in Google Earth of the regional grid that already exists. SMAST has for their model called FVCOM. As you can see, it actually covers a whole swath of the East Coast, from the Canadian Maritimes down to I think Virginia, maybe south of there. Classification adjacent to wastewater treatment plants, as I've said before, it's a NSSP requirement. There needs to be a mandatory prohibited area, a closed safety zone around the discharge for a wastewater treatment plant. And the NSSP says 1,000 to 1 dilution line is that within that is all prohibited. Outside to the 100,000 to 1 line is a conditional area. It can be either approved or restricted area. What are the impacts to this closed safety zone? Will prohibit all harvesting inside that zone. And then the reclassification to a conditional area, it impacts harvesting only during a wastewater treatment plant upset. So if the plant exceeds the performance criteria that's been set, maybe it's they're having an upset and they're discharging too much fecal coliform, or perhaps the total suspended solids, or maybe its flow rates are above whatever those performance standards are, then that conditional area will need to be closed. Just quickly, so you all know, there are the 5 classifications we used: approved, conditionally approved, restricted, conditionally restricted, and prohibited. An approved area is open to shellfishing for direct human consumption all the time. A conditionally approved is closed some of the time When it's open, it's treated as an approved area. A restricted area contains some background limited degree of contamination at all times. And when it's open, the shellfish can either be relayed to a less contaminated area or harvested for depuration. So an example of a relay is our contaminated relay program, taking cohogs from Taunton River and relaying them down to many communities on the Cape. Of course, the softshell clam depuration fishery is another example of the use of a restricted area or conditionally restricted area. Conditionally restricted area, it contains that a limited degree of contamination, and it's subject to other pollution events. So it could be rainfall, could be the wastewater treatment plant failure. When it's open, a conditionally restricted area is treated the same as a restricted area. And then prohibited, of course, it's closed all the time, and the only use of it is for seed for propagation. So you've seen this before. This is the hypothetical example of a wastewater treatment plant discharging. There's a prohibited area that the line between prohibited and the conditional area that could be conditionally approved or conditionally restricted, but that line is 1,000 to 1. And then 100,000 to 1 is that further, the lower boundary, where it turns to 14 fecal coliform per 100 mils. And that can be that 100,000 to 1 that this slide makes the conditional area look small. It's actually very large. It can be quite big compared to the 1,001, obviously. So that conditional area, that can be it can go outside mouths of harbors and can go quite a ways, impacting water quality or potential water quality for quite a distance. Typically, in the past, we've used dye studies to try to gauge what that impact is of a wastewater treatment plant on shellfish areas. But certainly a better approach is modeling. Modeling takes into account all environmental conditions. So your dye study is only representative of the conditions when that dye study took place. So whether the height of the tides or the winds, whether a storm, maybe there's rainfall, a dye study is only good, only accurately represents the conditions during that study. Whereas a model, we can take all kinds of environmental conditions, all kinds of tidal heights, storm conditions, and model that where the effluent goes. So a model in many ways is superior to the actual dye study. And that's what we're doing, we've moved on to. And so we have a contract with SMAST at UMass Dartmouth. We received 100,000 budget earmark to conduct wastewater treatment plant dilution studies. So we've started on the North and South River in Scituate, and that's our first one. The FVCOM model, we've asked SMAS to start with the North and South Rivers, and they're going to move on to all our wastewater treatment plants that impact shellfish areas, mass shellfish areas. We're going to provide them with the input parameters for the closed safety zone and conditional areas, specifically the outfall locations, flow rates we want modeled, as well as the concentrations. Fecal coliform could be virus concentrations as well. SMAST is going to develop the high resolution domain that's needed to do this modeling. So this is the existing regional grid, and for the North River in particular. So this grid is around a resolution of 300 to 1, 300 meters to 1 resolution. So, and you can see here, it only covers, let's say, the main stem, maybe a half mile, a quarter mile from the coast, which is not adequate for our purposes. You can see up above here, this is the location of the Scituate wastewater treatment plant, and there isn't even a grid for that discharge. It discharges into a mosquito ditch, And so you have 1.6 million gallons a day going into a mosquito ditch, and it's not even represented on this model. So obviously we needed to do some work. So this is what SMAST has done so far. And you can see there was considerable amount of work. Anyone who's been around the water for the last 10 years, 20 years, you know that the tides that at one point only covered the high marsh a couple of times a year, several times a year. Now we're seeing that multiple times in a month. And so with climate change and the sea level rise, we really needed to have all the marsh covered so that we can model it accurately. So SMAST has gone in, and this is a very labor intensive activity. Even still, this grid is not complete because it doesn't go far enough south. So more work will be done by SMAST. And this is a zoomed in view. You can see how small we can get in. The goal of this size grid is to get down to a 10-meter resolution. So that's you can tell that a lot of work went into this, and it's needed going forward. This will be needed. This level of detail will be needed for all wastewater treatment plants that are discharged inshore. If they're in an estuary, or the regional grid just doesn't have the resolution needed or the coverage needed. So we're asking SMAST to do a lot more work, and because it has required this level of work, it's taken us a lot longer. So we had hoped to have 6 to 12 wastewater treatment plants modeled in 1 year, and they're still working on this first high resolution domain. So it's a slower process than we had hoped, but they are continuing, SMAST is. So our next steps, we're hoping to wrap up the North-South River this summer. 100,000 earmark has been included in the proposed FY23 state budget. Now there's a lot of time left to develop that budget, but we're feeling very good about that. So we'll be able to continue this. We'll have funding to continue this project into this coming fiscal year. SMAST, once they finish the North and South River, the Situate wastewater treatment plant, they'll move on to other wastewater treatment plants, and we have anywhere between 15 and 24 that impact shellfish areas. So that there's a lot more work to do. It's going to proceed faster when those the outfalls are in the ocean, and such as Marshfield is offshore. But if those wastewater treatment plants discharge to shallow estuarine embayments, it's going to be much more labor intensive, and it's going to take a lot more time. So we're moving ahead. We're excited, but unfortunately, it's never as fast as we want.
Hey,
I
Jeff,
could take questions from the panel.
Jeff, if I could just clarify, especially for Representative Dom, you mentioned the $100,000 earmark. Just to explain that technically, it was a $100,000 increase to an existing earmark. So if anybody goes to open our budget, they're not going to see a $100,000 earmark for this particular activity. They're going to see a $550,000 earmark to SMAST to conduct studies, including this work. So I don't want anybody to get nervous if they open our budget at some stage of the budget process and don't see the number 100,000, assigned to this. But it's the old earmark was for 450, and we successfully got the legislature to increase it to 550. But we can take any questions.
Steve?
Thanks, Jeff. I want to see if you can clarify. You're saying any outfall to an area that impacts shellfishing. Does that mean any coastal or ocean discharge, Or does that mean something else, like an area that's already prohibited, or, some other classification type, or the number of wastewater treatment plants that need to be modeled?
Yeah, good question. There are 24 that I've identified that impact shellfish growing areas. Of those, we probably need 15 are a priority. Those are impacting either restricted areas or approved areas. Certainly, there are some in the hinterlands that contribute to contamination levels. Say those treatment plants on the Merrimack that are quite a ways upriver. They don't discharge directly to a shellfish growing area, yet they will end up over Newburyport. So we're focusing on those that are discharging to the open areas first, obviously, and those that are harvested areas. And as time and effort and funds allow, we'll include other areas, but we're really focused on those wastewater treatment plants, NIPD's permits. But and the largest ones, there can be some small package plants, and if we have time, we'll look at those as well. But we're focused on really the bigger players.
Thanks. Yeah, just making sure that there's some recognition or cataloging of the entire need, and then prioritizing seems like obviously the right approach. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Steve. Todd?
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for the update. I'm just curious about the specifics about the inputs, or I guess the outputs. So for these 15 or so wastewater outfalls, Chen's lab is going to be giving you the 1,000 to 1 and then 100 to 1,000 to 1 dilution lines.
Yes, it's even more. It's not just an average, although that's what we ultimately need. They'll model it for say a year's time, so we'll actually see where that 1,000 to 1 and where that 100,000 to 1 moves based on historical environmental records. So he could run it backwards for a year or several years. So that'll be very helpful. Ultimately, we need some average standard for that 100,000 to 1, that 1,000 to 1.
Do the feds give you a recommendation on how to determine that?
The NSSP is in the guidance. It's rather general, but so we can approach it several ways. Unfortunately, once we have our determination, we'll submit that our dilution analysis to the evaluators, and they'll come back. They'll have their experts look at it, and then they'll express their concerns. So it's a bit of a give and take process.
Thank you. I'd be really interested in seeing the results when you get the first report from North and South River. I'm just thinking about other possible applications. As you know, we're talking about contaminants of emerging concern from the MWRA outfall. And so thinking about things like that from some of the other wastewater treatment plants, it'll be useful just to see where these models put that line. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Thank you.
Not seeing any other hands, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jared. Okay, next on the agenda is a DMF policy clarifying value-added processed non-conforming cohogs. I think, Jared, you have a short presentation on this.
I don't have a presentation, but Julia, could you pull up the policy itself?
Yes. Is that 98?
No, it's the DMF policy.
Oh, yeah. Can you see that?
Yeah, could you just slide down to the actual policy of it, second page, I believe. Yep, and zoom out. One more so we can see the whole policy. All right, so just a little background on this particular policy. We received a request from a Massachusetts seafood processor who wanted to bring in import aquaculture reared cohogs that were frozen from a dealer in another state that did not conform to our state's minimum size. They'd be coming in at about 7/8 inch. And what they wanted to do was take these frozen cohogs, further process them into an added value product, which was going to be vacuum sealed individual packages of these cohogs with some type of flavor added, butter and herbs, butter, garlic, things like that, and then distribute those to restaurant chains and retailers throughout the United States and abroad. We're asked to accommodate this request, and I had some prior experience working on frozen added value product issues when we're dealing with a fairly analogous situation over the past decade with the processing of lobsters. Just for quick background, state statute used to prevent the breaking of lobsters as it would obscure the enforcement of the minimum size. As market conditions changed, the market for lobster tails had increased, and the whole product was no longer preferable in certain market categories. So we were there was a push at the legislative level to amend the statute to allow the breaking of whole live lobsters into processed lobster tails, and Dan and I worked extensively on that and address some of the commerce issues related to that. And building on that experience, we developed this policy, which would allow the importation of that product, and further would allow any aquaculture reared cohogs in Massachusetts, which may be harvested at 7/8 inch shell thickness, to be purchased across this product. So what it does, it accomplishes several things. First, as this product is going to be frozen, packaged, and value added, there is not an enforcement issue at hand in dealing with the minimum size. Therefore, we are allowing for this product to be sold in Massachusetts and not subject to the state's minimum size. Second, we are allowing wholesale dealers who are primary buyers of shellfish to purchase this product from 7/8 inch cohogs from aquaculturists, as the regulations currently allow them to do. Under those regulations, they're currently required to sell the raw product out of state. What this policy does is adds that if they wish to process this product into packaged, frozen, value-added shell-on product, they may do that as well, and that product may be sold in-state. Third, Massachusetts wholesale dealers may obtain frozen in-shell aquaculture reared product from another jurisdiction, e.g. Virginia, and they may process that into packaged, frozen, value-added product for distribution in Massachusetts and out of state as well. And this is subject, both 2 and 3 of this policy are subject to a letter of authorization that DMF will issue to the dealer, which covers how these cohogs may be possessed and imported, segregated on site, the disposition of the product and tagging requirements, so that there are no, so that we can address how this product is to be handled, so that it can be easily differentiated from any raw product, so that there are no enforcement and compliance concerns. So this policy went live, I think, towards the end of February, and is now in place. So that basically covers the nuts and bolts of it, and I'd be happy to take any questions on it. Ron?
One of my favorite subjects, if you've been following it. If you're saying that Massachusetts agriculturists can sell to wholesale dealers undersized quahogs, why can't I do that?
The 1-inch minimum size is implemented as a conservation standard. If wild harvesters want us to review that conservation standard, we could be petitioned to do so.
We don't want you to review the standard. We want you to know why there's a double standard currently in this regulation.
The aquaculturalists own the product, and it's not a conservation issue for them to harvest it at a sublegal size.
Well, so right now the aquaculturists can sell these quahogs, these whatever they are, 7/8 or whatever quahogs, right?
They can sell them to a wholesale dealer in Massachusetts, and the raw product may only be sold out of state.
And so now what we're saying is that they can sell it to a processor, as long as that processor processes it and into a, and puts it out into the market as a processed product.
Correct. And that processor could also import from another state to do the same.
Well, I mean, I've always tried to hold to the standard that all the wild shelfmen hold to, which is, they keep the same size. But I mean, I'd have to review this. Of course, it's already in place. But I'm just, if this is limited to what is laid out here in the rules, it doesn't seem to do too much damage. But I'm just curious as to whether or not the agriculturist is going to want it down the road, saying, well, why not sell if I can sell it to a processor, why not sell it to the live market? I mean, it's
sure,
sort of
and that
camel
request,
nose under the tent type of thing.
Yeah, and that request may come. It would have to be analyzed on that basis. There's a larger enforcement concern when dealing with live product, because it would be entering into the same markets and it wouldn't be processed and packaged as such and wouldn't be segregated as such. So there are enforcement compliance issues with that. I don't want to speculate too much on that because we haven't received it yet. My understanding of it is that there's not a particularly strong live market for the smaller than 1-inch product. And that's why this product is being processed into frozen product, is because it doesn't have that market, and it's being harvested because of aquacultural concerns that it may not reach that 1-inch size. So rather than having to destroy it, it can enter into commerce, and it enters into this commerce as this less valuable added value frozen product, and that it is preferable for this to get to that 1-inch size where there is a raw bar market for it.
Well, I'm thinking, I'm running this through my head now. If I bought a can of packaged Chalpino or even a clam chowder or something, there's no way you can determine what's in that. So yep. I imagine that it's not going to question of enforcement once it's out of our hands. So
correct, and it's not subject to the model ordinance once it's been processed or frozen. So I've consulted DPH on that, and I believe that's where that ends.
Okay, Josh Ritzman's got his hand up.
Yeah, just really quick. So the processor can bring in animals that are minimum 7/8 thickness, or can they go smaller? Because I know a lot of other clam producing areas have no minimum size for aquaculture.
At present, they can bring in product from another state that conforms with that state's regulations, aquaculture reared product. So it's 7/8 for Massachusetts. That's what they may purchase from aquaculturalists, because that's what our regulation allows the aquaculturalist to harvest and sell at that below 1-inch minimum size. product coming in from out of state may come in at a size that conforms to that state's minimum size. So if it's smaller than 7/8, they could bring that in, provided it's labeled as product of that state.
Got it. Yeah, it's just a little bit of a competitive disadvantage, and certainly slower growing up here, disease issues, the faster a clam grower could get product sold
And
would help.
And if the aquaculture industry wanted us to review that 7/8 shell thickness for cohogs in Massachusetts, that would be something we'd have to do by regulation.
Got it. Thank you.
Because that's set in regulation as the minimum size for aquaculture.
Mike DeVasto?
Yeah, this is pretty similar to what happened with oysters when there was a lot of dermo and MSX that killed stuff off, and we got a petite market. Well, we got the ability to sell petite oysters out of the state of the Massachusetts, but couldn't sell them in state. And at that time, there was not much of a market for petite oysters, and now there is. The difference being obviously that this has already been brought up that when you're growing something, you're not putting pressure on the natural resource other than the spawning that it could produce. But I just, with our clam issues here with neoplasia and Wellfleet, I'm not sure if it really makes sense to do one and not the other. Once they're sort of going into the Massachusetts market, I guess I don't understand what the downside would be to allowing the sale of clams if there is a market for half shell. I guess it's outside of the scope of what we're talking about in a way, but we're just commenting on this. It's already been accepted, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, Mike, to speak to that, we haven't received any requests beyond the scope of what this policy allows. That's why this policy is now narrowly tailored. It's because that's what we've been asked to address. So that's what we have addressed. If there's interest in a half shell market at the sub 1 inch size, and that's going to have to be addressed separately and reviewed separately, given potential enforcement and compliance concerns with wild harvest product and aquaculture raised product. I don't want to speculate too much on that.
Yeah, I don't
know. Have to be reviewed separately.
I don't know that there would be a market for it or not. I totally understand that. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Mike. Seth Garfield?
Hey, Dan, great meeting so far. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. This is in the bigger picture. I understand the cohog situation, et cetera, but one of our members has been having an issue between the size and the season restrictions for farmed bay scallops. And I know it's not going to be answered today, but I'm just wondering if we could put something like that on a future discussion. Because if these farmers that are raising the bay scallops, if they're harvesting them in a different sequence than the normal wild fishery, that potentially is becoming an issue. And then the other thing is, maybe we should be looking at all farm raised species. I know that there's a few folks that are looking at some of the surf clams and other species that are out there, and we may be coming into those same questions of different sizes for farmers versus different sizes for wild harvesters. I'm just throwing out that as an idea to look into in the future. Thank you.
Sure, Seth. And you should have your member reach out to us to describe the exact situation he's in. I would say that it does get more complicated when some of the farmers are also wild harvesters, as we have in in Wellfleet, for example. And when individuals hold both permits, it gets really dicey. So I'd want to proceed really slowly on any of these changes. So at this point,
I believe in the past we have accommodated that to some extent on the bay scallop issue, and on surf clams, which Seth brought up. Our existing regulations treat surf clams like oysters, where there is no minimum size for aquaculture reared surf clams.
Great.
Cohogs are the only one where we've maintained a aquaculture specific minimum size.
Yeah, and that was in response to concerns coming out of Chatham about the viability of the wild fishery, and so that's why we held the line there. So
And if I could add, Dan, I'm pretty sure I know who Seth is talking about, and that
I do
individual.
too.
Okay, he has reached out and we have communicated with. you.
Okay. All right,
And
good enough.
as Jared stated, we have precedent of allowing it, and we have told our permitted growers that we would allow bay scallop harvest and sale outside of the wild harvest season.
All right. It's a season and a size issue, right?
It's a season and a size issue, and
Yeah.
both are specifically geared toward conservation. And as was pointed out already,
Right.
we're not influencing the wild resource, they're bringing it in. So we're saying they're not subject to those same.
Okay, so Seth, we're on it.
Yep, great. No, I appreciate that. And, obviously more species come up and more changes are needed, but as long as that's out there and, I guess a precedent has been set, that's great. Thank you.
Ron, you good?
Yeah,
Ron Borgstrom's got his hands up.
Yeah, I'm trying to picture out exactly how this works. I mean, what kind of products are we talking about? If it's going to be a canned product, or I can't imagine you're going to sell, for instance, stuffed clams that are 7/8 inches. I mean, so what exactly are we doing here? Do I foresee that an aquaculturist who simply either can't or won't grow his cohogs to the 1-inch size can sell them in bulk in the shell to a processor, let's say in Rhode Island, who will then convert them into whatever products they sell? I mean, is that what we're looking at? It seems a lot easier to do that. You just harvest them up in big fish boxes, off they go, and then you're done. So is that what we're looking at?
So my understanding of the market, Ron, is that it's going to be processed into frozen package product that has some type of seasoning on it, a butter herb mix, and then that's going to, from my discussions with the processor on that, they're going, the target market is like a pasta and clams type situation, where you just open up this frozen package of in-shell clams, toss them in the pan. When they open, dinner's ready. So in terms of marketing, I don't know, I wouldn't want to speak for the aquaculture industry as to how Massachusetts aquaculturalists would work with the processor on this. The processor is currently only bringing things in from out of state, and they're going to be bringing them in bulk.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm just curious as to where this is going, that's all.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions? If not, we'll move on. Other business. Actually, I'd like to follow up on something I brought up earlier. And Chrissy, if you could help me with this. The special review procedure for MIPA regarding aquaculture, is there any way you could give us like a 2-minute summary of what that is and why MIPA would like to get some public comment on it in the future?
Sure. So as most new aquaculturists can contest to, the permitting landscape can be very confusing, very onerous. And it's not clear always whether some new license sites will have to go through the MIPA, the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act review. And so MIPA is trying to have a streamlined review process for aquaculture projects that are open water, minimal structures, basically what, greater than 90% of our aquaculture operations are. And instead of requiring them to file an environmental notification form, which is a pretty robust form, it requires an alternatives analysis. It has, special maps and just different criterion for that application process. I'm Mike DeVasto. I know you're, in the middle of going through it right now. So what they're trying to do is take a look at what the thresholds are for MIPA review, the requirements of MIPA review. Right now, it's 1/2 acre of impacts. And even the impacts are not clear. So for MIPA review, a lot of times they defer to what the local conservation commission has listed as impacts or or alterations. Some local conservation commissions say, oh, you don't need an order of conditions. Some say, we're only going to look at the area of your equipment, your gear that's touching the bottom, whereas others say, if you have a half-acre site, that entire half-acre site is impact. So there's some inconsistency there. So they're looking to come up with certain thresholds. So define a new threshold for that specific type of aquaculture, and perhaps make it so that instead of having to fill out the environmental notification form that is required of most projects, the form that we've actually developed, actually Chris Scalacci and Catherine Ford worked on it before he ended up moving on to NOAA. And you can find this form on our aquaculture permitting site. I'm going to put a link to the aquaculture permitting site in the chat right now, just so if anybody's interested. But there is a link to that form. So we're looking to maybe alter that form in such a way that new growers or growers who want to have an expansion license to their existing site can fill out that form, and that form can be what goes through the MEPA review process. So it'll already be filled out. It'll be something that your local towns have to make their decision on whether or not to grant you the license or license extension. And then you can use that same document to move forward in the MEPA process. So that's the goal, to try to streamline it. There are some other confounding issues now that we have environmental justice requirements for we have to identify environmental justice communities. So if you are in an area within 1 mile of an environmental justice community, that complicates the streamlined process a little bit. But the idea is to set new thresholds. So right now, as I said, it's a half acre. So, you know, maybe we can set it to 3 acres or 5 acres and say, okay, as long as it's, you know, these standard gear types and this, you know, a standard operation, no feeding operations, then we can try to streamline the process so that an entire environmental notification form, alternatives analysis, and, you know, possibly, you know, additional paperwork can be minimized.
So Chrissy, what role would this group play in the SAP? So MEPA is interested, the MEPA office is interested in getting feedback, and they identified the Shellfish Advisory Panel as a potential audience for this. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure, yeah, and it's because of the diversity of this audience, I think, that appeals to MEPA and getting this feedback, because for one, the local shellfish constables have a voice on this panel. And also wild harvesters. So there's the question of, you know, if we make this a streamlined process, we want to make sure it's still getting a robust enough review. And so that's where they're trying to get some of this public feedback to make sure that, you know, while we're streamlining it to try to make it a less onerous thing for a less onerous hurdle for growers to jump through, we're still adequately assessing cumulative impacts both to resources and other fisheries. Okay. They're most particularly interested in natural resources.
So if we did convene the Shellfish Advisory Panel in the near future, it might be what, in the next 1 or 2 months, you think, if that they're looking for some feedback on this?
I would say 1 or 2 months. Yeah. Todd Callahan has been on that. I don't know, Todd, would you agree? And within the next 1 or 2 months,
I would say that that's probably a good time frame. If I'm recalling correctly, I think they wanted this all wrapped up by the end of the summer, right? Because we do have an administration change. There was also some discussion about lining this up with MEPA's regulations changes that are happening before the new administration. So I think sooner rather than later, getting feedback would be helpful.
Okay. All right, so it is a work in progress. I just want to point out to the group that we didn't plan on having any summer meetings, but I would bring the group back for a special discussion about this at the request of the MEPA office. And I think it would be worthwhile. So, okay. So thank you for that, Chrissy. It is pretty obtuse, and you did a nice job boiling that down. So under other business, this is an opportunity for any of the panel members, if they want to raise their hand and just make any comments on these issues or any other business that they would like to bring up? I think we have Ron and Dale who have their hands up.
Yep, Ron, you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Just a small issue that comes up once in a while is the rights of indigenous people to shellfish in any town they want to. Obviously, they have to obey some rules. They can't access areas that are closed seasonally and so on. I'm not so sure that everyone is familiar with this. I would like to be able to see that if they are confronted by, say, assistant shellfish warden, that they be able to resolve the issue either by identifying themselves or by an educational period for the wardens, and also the other shellfishermen. Once in a while, they'll say, "Hey, who is this guy?" I haven't seen him before in my life, and he has to explain, "Hey, I'm a Wampanoag. I have a right to shellfish." So, I think a brief explanation as to what the rights of the indigenous people are as far as shellfishing here in Massachusetts would be valuable for the panel and for the people involved.
Ron, I appreciate that comment, and it is something that we're actively working on. It's also the same request that we've gotten from the Mass Shellfishers Office Association at their upcoming meeting in March. There's going to be a roundtable discussion on that. And many of the constables have turned to DMF and the state to help clarify or to create policies that allow sort of consistent treatment of those kinds of incidents. So it is not, it's not an issue that we're ignoring. We are actively working on this this week, actually, to try to bring clarity to that. We just have Dale Levitt.
Hey, Dan. Excellent meeting. Lots of good information. You said in your introduction that you were starting to move forward on the bulk tagging issue, but then you haven't really mentioned it since then. Want to fill us in on some of the details?
Yes, and I blew that one because I also want to create a subcommittee to look at bulk tagging, and I would right now bulk tagging is allowed by some grower dealers, and I know there's an interest in allowing bulk tagging by some of the growers who aren't dealers, and there's even some in the industry who would like to see bulk tagging allowed for wild harvesters. And I would also like to create an analogous subcommittee on that to work with DPH and environmental police to describe what the challenges are and make some recommendations that maybe we could work on in regulation. So I was remiss in not bringing that forward. So I do intend to, over the next week, is to create a subcommittee on that as well. And I would welcome anybody who wants to participate in that to work with us. I know it's an issue that MAA has a really a keen interest in. And so yeah, this subcommittee would involve someone from Department of Public Health, because obviously once the stuff has been sold or at the point of first sale, then it becomes a DPH issue. DMF rules mostly end at, and DPHs take over once the stuff's been sold. And so it is something I want to work on. So, I'd welcome you if you'd want to participate in that committee as well.
Thanks, Dan.
Steve, you can unmute yourself.
Thanks. I don't think I have a specific suggestion on how to pull this all together, but I do feel like there is a perhaps once in a generation opportunity in federal funding that is going to start flowing, whether around infrastructure or other big spending packages. And it would seem like a worthwhile exercise to ID whether, some of those things in the Mass Shellfish Initiative strategic plan that call for funding. One example, DMF, I remember calling out the, lack of lab capacity. There, I feel like could be several opportunities to try to draw some Venn diagrams around needs and where potential funding sources could come to bear to meet some of those needs.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'll work with staff on some of those issues. I know Chrissy is our lead on the harmful algal blooms, and that was one of the areas we identified as a weakness and something we wouldn't be ready for if we did get a serious outbreak. So we'll work on something and bring it forward at the next meeting. Anyone else?
There's no other hands. We can move on to public comments if you'd like.
Excellent. I know there's been some members of the public who've had their hands up almost for much of the meeting. Helen Miranda Wilson, you're welcome to speak.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Thank you. And a couple things. One is most Zoom meetings I go to, and I go to a lot of public service Zoom meetings, have a list of participants, and that more closely resembles a normal open meeting pre-pandemic. And it would be great if, for example, I could look at the list of participants and see who else from Wellfleet or other communities was there. So if you could do that, that would be an add.
Helen, we use a webinar format, which only allows the panelists to be seen. There's unfortunately not much we can do. That is a Zoom problem. We've run into this before with the Shellfish Initiative meetings as well. Unfortunately, it's just a function of Zoom.
Okay, but I have two other things. Thank you for explaining that.
Yep.
The second thing is you might want to look as a model for the constable training programs to the state's procurement courses, which I took, which more closely resemble what needs to be achieved by the constable training courses. I actually took one of them and it was very good, and you might want to look at that model. The third thing is I look forward to going, as a fly on the wall to the subcommittee meetings about the whole question of the transfer of aquaculture licenses. And I applaud the DMF wanting to take an in-depth look at that and consider it carefully. I really appreciate that as an individual who has been paying attention to it. The last thing I want to say is Wellfleet has a very nice section in our regulations about enforcement, which includes the police department with all its training, of course. It's 11.1 in our regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. It's always a pleasure to have you contribute to these meetings.
Oh, yeah, really?
You're always very constructive. I appreciate that.
Okay, next we have Dominic. You can unmute yourself.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep. Could you please state your last name?
Yeah, my name is Dominic Desiata.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, I'm a recreational clammer out of Plymouth Bay, Wampanoag territory for many years, and I had two questions. This is my first meeting, and I don't know if I really don't know the state of anything with this panel or what's available. So I'm trying to find out. One of my questions is there statistics available as far as the arrests and citations issued by Shellfish constables about that break down the racial statistics on arrests and citations?
Dominic, we wouldn't have that information. DMF wouldn't hold that. You would have to go to the communities. We simply did informal phone interviews asking the constables to recollect to the best of their ability a number. But we didn't ask for documentation of any of that. So we wouldn't be in possession of any of those records.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is there any resources available, literature or I don't know, outreach media about shellfishing in Massachusetts, recreational in any languages besides English?
Well, that's a good question. That would be a question for each town because recreational shellfishing is the domain of the municipalities. And I wouldn't know that, but it's certainly something we could ask the towns about.
Yeah, it would be.
Is there a particular language that you're interested in? And
I mean, I think there's probably, we could probably come up with a list of languages that are useful in Massachusetts. In my particular situation, and my family is mostly Spanish speaking, as well as, a lot of people I associate with, a lot of people that are, go to the sea for food. And I think it would be a big help in terms of the interests of conservation, as well as, equality of access to the sea's resources, to have information available in other languages.
okay, good comment. Thanks.
Thank you.
Jacob.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I enjoyed listening to you guys. I'm a commercial fisherman in Barnstable. I like that this meeting was held not at low tide. It's able to work the low tide this afternoon. And I just wanted to say, if that was by accident, that's one thing. If not, I appreciate it if it was on purpose, and just to keep doing that so that people can attend these meetings, since most of us work at low tide.
Sure, thank you. Jeff Gordon.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I've got two questions, if I may. The first is, how is the plant outflow integrated into the dilution study metric in determining which clam beds are closed? Because just as an example, if you've got a plant with an average outflow of, say, 10 CF per 100 milliliters, and you use the 1,000-to-1 metric, what about the plant that's 20 miles up the coast with a 50 CF per 100 milliliter? Are they using the same dilution rate metric to determine what's prohibited and what's not? That's my first question. I've got one other.
Yeah, let's go with the answer first. Jeff, would you like to tackle that?
So let me, Jeff, let me try to understand this a little bit more. In a situation where there is a treatment plant that's upriver versus treatment plant that's closer to a growing area, how do you calculate for those overlapping discharges? Is that?
Well, it's the variability in discharges. Not every plant is exactly the same as the one that's 10 or 15 miles up the coast, right? And that's the question. How do you account for the variability of plant rate outflow? Well, you're using constant dilution rate with variable outflows, and so why is dilution rate the metric and not the outflow? Why was it not integrated in the outflow?
Well, that's what we kind of hope to get from our modeling, from SMAS's modeling, is trying to get the discharge rates are unknown. All those they're called the daily monitoring reports, DMRs. Those are public information. We can take that information and we can plug it into this model and determine, say, for the last year, 2 years, on a daily basis, just exactly what those impacts are. That's the advantage of doing modeling versus a dye study. So, it's a great question. It's getting kind of advanced. We're hoping that we can take these dilution studies to a different level utilizing the SMAS model. So it's even better is when you can run a model for, say, Scituate, and at the same time you're running the same you're running from Marshfield and maybe Cohasset as well, just to see what those overlapping impacts are. So it's a good question. We'll have a better idea of that this summer, exactly what the model can do for us.
And if I could add, Jeff, the model isn't going to tell us where our classification lines are. The model is going to give us some information from which we can make informed decisions. So we have to do our homework with all the individual outfall with the plants that are operating, those individual outfalls. And, we can feed into the model, as Jeff said, the, worst case scenario. We can feed into it average flows and average concentrations. But other information we have is the ability for that specific treatment plant to have backup flow. So we can have a worst case scenario, but if the likelihood of that worst case scenario is very, very small, then maybe we don't take the classification on that unrealistic worst case scenario. So there's a lot of information and a lot of homework that has to be done on our end for us to give those parameters that the SMAS researchers can feed into the model, if that makes any sense.
It makes perfect sense. But the North and South Rivers have been closed since October 2020 while these dilution studies are going on, and the outflows data are already readily available. I view them. And so I guess it's, we can, that's fine. I understand. I guess I do think that just as a point for this purpose of this meeting, plant outflow has not been brought up at all. And it is probably the most important metric to be considering. And so I would urge you to consider plant outflow more than these expensive dilution rate studies.
Well, Jeff, I think plant outfall is going into the calculation for dilution.
Certainly, it has.
Yeah, I think you're swinging and missing on that.
Yeah, it is. And not only that, for the North-South River, without a more comprehensive model, so Jeff showed the maps showing what our bathymetry information was. With what the simple FDA model is taking average bathymetry, and with the more sophisticated model that is increasing the area for which we can say there's water there to help dilute, it's only going to help the situation. With the information we have now, we're nowhere near reaching that 1,000 to 1 line within the North-South River system. So this effort is actually to try to help us find more dilution if it exists.
Yeah. And Jeff, did you have a second question?
No, I'm good.
Okay, thanks.
Scott Shores, you can unmute.
Scott, I understand you've got a new job.
Yeah, it's I've accepted an appointment from the Biden-Harris administration to start with USDA Rural Development on the 14th of this month, and we're still working through just exactly what I'll be able to continue to do outside as kind of extracurricular type work, so to speak. But excited to stay as involved as I possibly can, especially now that I'm also a co-owner of a shellfish farm myself now in my hometown of Dartmouth. So thanks for queuing that up. But I do have a question, and I'm looping back to the Section 98 authority. And by way of, again, a little bit of background, I was also the son of a law enforcement family. My dad was a chief of police in Dartmouth and up in Vermont, in Norwich, Vermont. And my uncle was also a deputy chief in Dartmouth. And I also spent some time in my varied background and career as an officer over at the Bristol County Sheriff's Department. And I recognize, the differences between, and I was a deputy shellfish constable in Westport. So I recognize the differences and kind of the finesse between natural resource officers as well as law enforcement, pure up law enforcement officers. And I understand and agree with the leverage that Section 98 gives constables on the arresting authority. But I also recognize the pretty significant responsibility that comes with that by way of not just a one and done training, but really regular training, things like firearms, de-escalation training, can have a whole range of things that anybody who's enforcing the law and making arrests really needs to be a part of those trainings going forward. So I would just, strongly recommend that if the authority for arrest continues for shellfish constables, that they also be given the tools through regular training to engage that, not just to, threat arrest, but actually to have the tools that they can implement to ultimately, go ahead and make those arrests with all of the training that goes along with that. So again, just advocating for that regular training if in fact that Section 98 authority is maintained.
Well, I can tell you that we're not seeking any modification to that particular aspect of 98. So, but we appreciate your comments on that.
Thanks, Dan.
All right. And good luck in your new position. And thank you for all of the contributions that you made to the creation of the strategic plan and helping us get this codified in state law, the Shellfish Advisory Panel.
Oh, thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. And I'm not going far, so I'm looking forward to contributing wherever and however I can. And with the new role, it's important, I think, for any of those, especially, those who work with municipalities, that there are, a suite of different programs available, 50 some odd programs with USDA rural development that can really help on rural communities, and of which many, in fact, most of the communities in Massachusetts are. So I'm looking forward to continuing that work as well, and even if in a different capacity.
Right. All right. Well, congratulations,
Thanks.
Scott.
Thank you.
Chris Newhall?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you for letting me speak. I'm a recreational harvester here in Situate, and some of my question may have been answered between Chrissy's comment in the chat and some of the discussion, but I guess I'm looking to understand the SMAS study and maybe get some confirmation that study will identify the dilution lines based on seasonal variation in the average daily flow rates from the wastewater treatment plants, and that those dilution lines would then be used to kind of set the harvest area classifications. Currently or previously we had opened and closed those beds based on seasonal variation as well, just from other standard water quality classifications within that water. And it would seem that would kind of be a logical approach to setting that classification and open or closed status moving forward. So is that the intent of the SMAS study? Is that what will be the ultimate result?
Yeah, I believe so, but I'll tee up Jeff or Chrissy.
Yeah, it's two different, the way we've managed the area in the past has been strictly based on our water quality monitoring. And that shows degraded water quality during the warmer months and better water quality during the cooler months. What we were not including, and we should have been including, was the dilution analysis for wastewater treatment plant. And so that's what this modeling, SMAS modeling is to address that inadequacy and to try to come up with compliance with the NSSP for that 1,000 to 1 and that 100,000 to 1 line. And then it's not only based on the modeling, but also, as Chrissy said, our own evaluation of the wastewater treatment plant performance going forward, and exactly the likelihood of upsets and failures at the treatment plant. So it's not strictly based on the SMAS model, but certainly that will help us. And the new high resolution domain will really help us find more water in the system for dilution. So we're hoping going forward, we'll have a better idea of exactly where the effluent goes and where those lines are.
Right. So I guess, will there ever be a potential to have a closed or open status based on, say, any seasonal variability in all of, the calculus that goes into this? Or will it essentially be, a set dilution line that comes out of this, and it's either going to be open or closed moving forward?
Yeah, good question again. I envision if we can find the area within the North-South River estuary that is above the 1,001, that those seasonal parameters will probably stick. We'll probably still do that that summer winter seasonal classifications. So
the key point Jeff made was if we can find dilution outside that 1,000 to 1 within the system. And the reason FDA requires that and the NSSP requires that is because there's a multitude of viruses, other microorganisms, other chemicals that could potentially be coming out of the, that could be in the effluent that we're not testing for. And because we're not testing for everything, if we were testing for everything, we could probably make the water quality test, the case for water quality. But because we're not testing everything, we're held to those dilution thresholds.
Yeah, understood. It's just a shame that this is, a traditional right that has been ongoing, and a lot of work was done over the last 20 years to get those beds reopened. And, I guess I've never personally experienced any type of sickness or I guess adverse health reaction, and to, start imposing restrictions now because we're not testing for everything, and, we're making these determinations based on a model as opposed to, true hard data of what is actually in the water, what viruses are there. And I know that that is a difficult thing, but it's taking away a right that is, something that, if we make these decisions, we'll likely never get it back.
Okay. Pete Seminara. And Pete, I'd like to thank you for that thoughtful letter you put to the panel, and it really captured a great counterbalance to some of the concerns that we were raising. So why don't you go ahead? You need to unmute yourself, though.
I'm not seeing him unmuting. Let's try that.
Okay.
We can go to Todd Callahan.
Hi, yeah, I just had a point, Jeff and Chrissy. I was just thinking about the wastewater discharges. And I believe through the discharge monitoring reports that a wastewater treatment plant owner, what they report is the 12-month rolling average. And they do that to allow some flexibility to the plant in meeting their performance standards because of springtime, much higher flows. So I'm just curious if you realize that, and I don't know if it'll affect it or not, but I'm guessing that there are going to be months that are, especially in the spring, where the flow is actually a lot higher than what they're reporting, and so this might be a good a pilot test to see in situ if in fact it does change the dilution based on the actual discharge versus the 12-month rolling average.
yeah, we're looking at even just the daily reports, and so not just the monthly averages. So, and that's what we'll provide to SMAST. But yeah, no question. Flow rates go up in the spring, and they come down slowly over the summer, and lowest in the winter. So it's a bit of an art form, even with all the modeling, all the math involved. There's still a bit of an art form to this, no question.
Do you think so? SMAST is going to give you 365 lines, and you're going to average them somehow, or their positions?
That's certainly possible. I think that but in many ways that's too much information.
Yeah.
Really what we need is an average. So I think that's more a seasonality, as you were speaking, is that monthly or season is probably a better way to manage the area.
Right. I mean, and when they do have more flow, more water going through the system, that's usually more just fresh water. So it's actually more dilution. but I'm just curious how it works out.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. We've got three.
Seminara,
Yeah.
any luck unmuting? There we go.
I just wanted to say that this is a very informative meeting, and I appreciate all the work you guys.
Pete, we're
We
having
can't-
trouble hearing you. Yeah.
Better now?
A little
Yeah, go
bit.
ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I appreciate what you guys are doing. This is a very informative meeting.
Thank you.
Brian Vanderhoop.
Brian, you have to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hey there. I just want to make this quick. I heard that there might be available funds coming, hopefully through grants. Hopefully for I've had a huge explosion of codium in Menamsha Pond, and it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. It's last year there was hardly any, and then this year it's all over the place. It's covering the whole bottom of Menamsha Pond in Chilmark and Aquina. My town is Aquina. And somebody mentioned there might be some grants coming through, hopefully that I could use on invasive aquatic species. Does anybody have any foresight in anything coming through like that?
Todd Callahan, can you help us with that?
I was actually just going to email a colleague, Adrian Pappel at Coastal Zone Management is our invasive species person. So I was just going to email her a question on that. I guess I can get back to you guys by email when I get the answer.
Okay, Brian, do we have your contact information? Or maybe you could just send it to one of us and we'll pass it along to Todd.
I'll put my
Okay.
email in the chat and you can email it to me.
Okay, thanks, Julia.
All right.
Thank you all.
You're welcome. All right, we're coming to the end. This meeting was scheduled to end at noon. We've got 4 minutes left. I don't see any other hands up at this
Yeah,
time.
Dan, David Doffney had his hand up.
Okay.
It's been lowered.
Okay. David, do you have any comments you'd like to make? Yep, I'm not seeing it. Okay, well, everyone, thank you for a productive meeting. I will be emailing the group with any seeking volunteers for those 2 committees, one on bulk tagging and the other on the transfers of municipal permits. If anybody wants to get back to us on any aspect of this meeting, feel free to do so. We will be posting the written summary of this meeting probably over the next couple of weeks. It'll be posted to our website as a draft. And I want to thank everybody for really contributing to some great discussions today. And Henry Lind, good luck with the training next week.
Dan, I think we need a motion to adjourn.
Go ahead.
Can we get a motion to adjourn?
Ron Bergstrom, so moved.
Thanks, Ron. In a second.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.